Don't look there. The rancher stared anyway and changed everything forever. The rancher had lived on that land for most of his life. He was a quiet man known for his steady routine and calm nature. Every morning he woke before sunrise, drank his coffee on the porch, and looked over the wide fields that stretched far into the distance. The land was dry but loyal, just like him. It had belonged to his family for 3 generations, passed down with stories, rules, and unspoken understandings. Some places were good for cattle, birth. Some places were not. And some places were simply left alone without questions. His days were usually the same. He fixed fences, checked water lines, and made sure the animals were safe. He liked the silence of the ranch. Out there, far from towns and noise, he felt in control. Life had taught him that control came from routine. When things stayed the same, nothing went wrong. That belief had kept him steady for years. Late one afternoon, while the sun was slowly sinking and the sky turned a soft orange, he was repairing a broken fence near the far edge of his property. That area was rarely used. The grass grew uneven and the soil felt harder underfoot. Even the air felt different there, heavier somehow, though he never thought much about it. He was focused on his work when he heard footsteps behind him. It was an old ranch hand named Samuel, a man who had worked the land longer than anyone else. Samuel moved slowly, leaning on a stick, his face lined with age and experience, race. He was not the type to talk much, and when he did, people listened. "You shouldn't be here this late," Samuel said quietly. The rancher wiped sweat from his forehead and smiled. "Fence won't fix itself," he replied. Samuel didn't smile back. Instead, he looked past the rancher, toward a distant stretch of land where the sun's light was fading faster than everywhere else. "Whatever you do," Samuel said after a pause, "don't look there after sunset." The words sounded strange, almost out of place. The rancher laughed lightly, thinking the old man was joking or maybe just tired. "Look where?" the rancher asked. Samuel shook his head. "You don't need to know. Just don't." There was something in Samuel's voice that made the rancher stop smiling. It wasn't fear exactly. It was certainty, the kind that comes from knowing more than you want to explain. Before the rancher could ask another question, Samuel turned and walked away, disappearing behind the low hills. The rancher stood there for a moment, holding his tools, watching the land Samuel had looked toward. It seemed normal, empty, quiet. Still, the warning stayed with him. As the sun dropped lower, the air grew cooler. The rancher finished his work and headed back home. Normally his mind would be calm at that hour, already planning dinner and the next day's tasks. But that evening his thoughts kept returning to Samuel's words. "Don't look there." The phrase repeated itself in his head as he sat on the porch later that night. The sky darkened, and stars slowly appeared. Coyotes howled in the distance, a sound he had heard all his life. Yet even that familiar noise felt different now. He found himself glancing toward the far edge of the ranch without meaning to. Told himself it was nothing. Old people say strange things. The land was full of stories, and most of them were exaggerated over time. Bust. Still, when darkness fully settled, he noticed something unusual. The animals were quiet. Too quiet. No movement. But he stood up, feeling a slight tightness in his chest, and shook his head. Breath. "You're letting nonsense get to you," he muttered. He went inside and locked the door, something he rarely bothered to do. That night, sleep did not come easily. Every small sound pulled him awake. The wind brushing against the walls felt louder than usual. At one point, he thought he saw light through the window, faint and distant. But when he looked again, there was nothing. The next morning he woke early, more tired than usual. He went about his routine, but things felt off. The cattle avoided certain paths. A horse refused to move near the fence he had repaired the day before. The rancher noticed hoofprints in places where no animals should have been. He tried to ignore it. Ranch life was unpredictable. Animals acted strange sometimes. That was normal. Later that day, he drove into town to buy supplies. At the general store, he ran into a few neighbors. They greeted him politely, but when he mentioned working near the far edge of his land, the mood shifted. One man cleared his throat. Another suddenly remembered something he needed to do. "Nothing wrong out there, right?" the rancher asked casually. "No," one answered directly. A woman finally said, "That land has a way of minding itself." The rancher frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She gave a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just be careful." That was all she said. The drive back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Dust followed his truck as the sun climbed high in the sky. He replayed the conversations in his mind, trying to find logic in them. Everyone was acting as if there was a shared understanding he had somehow missed. That afternoon, he decided to check his property records. He pulled out old papers and maps that had been kept in a wooden chest. The maps showed boundaries, water sources, and notes written by his grandfather. Most of it was familiar. But one section near the edge of the land had very little detail. No notes, no markings. Just empty space. That bothered him first. As evening approached again, the rancher felt uneasy. He remembered Samuel's warning and considered avoiding that part of the ranch completely. Yet something inside him resisted the idea. This was his land. He had worked it his whole life. Why should one area be off-limits without reason? As the sun began to set, the sky painted itself in deep reds and purples. The rancher stood outside, watching the day fade. His eyes drifted, almost without his permission, toward the place he had been warned about. He stopped himself. "Not tonight," he said quietly. Still, his heart beat faster. He felt like someone was waiting for him to make a mistake. The air grew colder, and a strange silence settled again. It wasn't threatening, but it was heavy, like the pause before a storm. That night, lying in bed, he realized something important. The warning was not just about looking, it was about knowing. And once you know something, your life cannot stay the same. He didn't look that night, but the seed had been planted. And curiosity, once awakened, does not sleep easily. The days that followed did not return to normal. The rancher tried to convince himself that nothing had changed, but deep down he knew that was not true. From the moment he woke up each morning, a quiet unease followed him like a shadow. The land still looked the same, the sky still opened wide above him, and the sun still rose on time, yet something inside him felt unsettled. Break. He kept himself busy on purpose. He worked longer hours, fixed things that did not really need fixing, and avoided resting. He believed that if his body was tired enough, his mind would stay quiet. But curiosity has its own strength. No matter how hard he worked, his thoughts kept drifting back to that distant part of the ranch. He began to notice patterns. The cattle moved together as usual, but they never crossed a certain invisible line. When one animal wandered close to it, it would stop suddenly, lift its head, and turn back. The rancher watched this more than once. Animals trusted instinct more than reason, and their behavior troubled him. One afternoon, while checking water tanks, he found a tool lying on the ground near the edge of the land. It was his own wrench. He was sure he had left it near the barn the day before. He picked it up slowly and looked around. There were no tracks nearby. No signs of anyone passing through. That night, he locked the doors again. Sleep came in pieces. He dreamed of open fields and fences that led nowhere. In his dreams, he kept walking towards something just out of sight. Every time he tried to see it clearly, he woke up with his heart racing. By morning, he felt more tired than before. A few days later, Samuel returned to the ranch. The old man stood near the barn, watching the rancher work. When the rancher noticed him, he felt a mix of relief and tension, but he was not sure he wanted to hear them. "You've been restless," Samuel said. The rancher paused. "You notice everything, don't you?" Samuel nodded slowly. "The land tells stories, if you pay attention." The rancher hesitated, then asked, "Why did you warn me?" Samuel looked toward the horizon, toward the place that had become impossible to ignore. "Because some truths don't arrive gently," he said. "Res, they come with weight." "What truth?" the rancher pressed. Samuel shook his head. "Not mine to give. Some things must be seen, not explained." That answer frustrated the rancher. "So you want me to stay ignorant?" "I want you to stay safe," Samuel replied. "There's a difference." Before the rancher could say more, Samuel turned and walked away again, leaving the question hanging in the air. The rancher felt anger rise, followed by doubt. He did not like being treated like a child. This was his land, his life. Later that day, he drove into town again. He visited the local records office, asking about the history of his property. The clerk, a quiet man with tired eyes, pulled out old files. Most were ordinary. Ownership transfers, tax records. But when the rancher asked about the far edge of his land, the clerk paused. "That area doesn't come up often," the clerk said. "Why?" the rancher asked. The clerk shrugged. "It's not disputed. It's not developed. People just leave it be." "That's not an answer." The clerk lowered his voice. "Desk back. Sometimes land holds responsibility. Not everyone wants it." The rancher left without pressing further. He was starting to understand that no one would give him clear answers. The silence around the subject was shared, almost agreed upon by everyone. That evening, as the sun lowered again, he stood farther from the house than usual. He told himself he was just checking fences, but he knew the truth. He wanted to feel closer to that unseen boundary. The light changed as sunset approached. Shadows stretched longer than they should have. The air felt still, as if the world was holding its breath. Bursts.
He stopped walking and listened. No birds.
No insects. Only the sound of his own breathing. Breath. From a distance, he thought he saw movement. Not fast. Vibration. Not dramatic. Just a shift. Like something adjusting its place. It pounded. He wanted to look directly, to confirm what his eyes were catching from the corner of his vision. He remembered the warning. He looked away. Back at the house, he sat at the table, staring at nothing. His hands trembled slightly. Breath. He realized something important then. The fear he felt was not of danger. It was of understanding. Whatever existed there was connected to choices, to history, to people who had once decided to look away. That night, he opened the wooden chest again. This time, he searched deeper. Beneath the maps and papers, he found an old notebook wrapped in cloth. It belonged to his grandfather. The writing was faded but readable. Most entries were about weather, crops, and daily life. But near the end, the tone changed. The words became shorter, heavier. Some land demands attention, one entry read. But because it wants harm, but because it holds unfinished truth. Those who see must decide. The rancher closed the notebook slowly. His grandfather had known. So had his father, perhaps. The knowledge had been passed down quietly, protected by silence. Outside, a faint glow appeared near the horizon. It was not bright, not threatening. Just present. The rancher watched it from the window, careful not to focus too directly. His chest felt tight, but his mind felt strangely clear. Curiosity was no longer just curiosity. It had become responsibility. He understood now that avoiding the truth was also a choice. And choices, whether made or avoided, always carried consequences. As the night deepened, the rancher made a silent promise to himself. He would not rush. He would not act out of fear. But he would not turn away forever. The land was waiting. And soon he knew he would have to decide whether to keep watching from a distance or finally face what was calling him forward. The rancher did not sleep much after that night. His mind stayed alert even when his body was tired. Every sound felt closer. Every silence felt louder. Morning came slowly, as if the sun itself was unsure about rising over the land. When daylight finally spread across the fields, he felt a strange relief. But it did not last long. Breathed in the cool air. Everything looked normal again. The grass moved gently with the wind. The fences stood where they always had. Birds returned, singing as if nothing had ever been wrong. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined everything, but the tight feeling in his chest told him otherwise. He decided to keep his distance that day. He worked near the house, repairing tools and cleaning the barn. Desk still. His eyes kept moving on their own, drifting toward the far edge of the ranch. It was like trying not to think of something by thinking about it even more. By afternoon, clouds rolled in, covering the sky with a dull gray. The air felt heavy, pressing down on his shoulders. He told himself that if he was ever going to understand what was happening, it had to be on his own terms. He would not wait for another warning. Breaths. They would not depend on half-spoken sentences and silent looks. As the sun began to lower, he made a decision. He walked slowly, not rushing, toward the edge of the land. Each step felt deliberate. The ground beneath his boots felt firmer the closer he got, as if the earth itself was more solid there. His heart beat louder in his ears, but his mind felt calm, almost clear. He stopped at a point where he could see the open stretch ahead. The sky darkened quickly, faster than usual. Psst. Shadows gathered in a way that felt unnatural, though nothing moved. The world seemed still, frozen between moments. He remembered Samuel's words. Don't look there after sunset. The sun slipped below the horizon. For a few seconds, the rancher stood completely still. He could feel his breath slow and controlled. Then, without turning away, without closing his eyes, he looked. At first, nothing happened. There was no sudden movement, no bright light. No loud sound, just the land, quiet and waiting. He felt almost foolish for expecting something dramatic. Then he noticed a difference, subtle but undeniable. Break. The air shimmered slightly, as if heat was rising from the ground, though the evening was cool. As he focused, shapes began to form. Not clear shapes, not solid ones, but impressions, like memories left behind rather than physical objects. He felt a deep sense of familiarity, as if he had been there before, even though he knew he had not. Then, understanding began to settle in. The land was not hiding something dangerous. It was holding something unresolved. Perhaps. Stories, choices, and moments that had been ignored for generations. The rancher felt them all at once, not as images, but as emotions. Regret, relief, responsibility. His knees felt weak, and he sat down slowly on the ground, never taking his eyes away. He realized that what he was seeing was not meant to scare him. It was meant to inform him. The warning had never been about harm. It had been about readiness. He saw flashes of the past, not clear scenes, but feelings connected to people who once stood where he was standing now. People who had looked, understood, and then chosen silence. They had believed that leaving things untouched was the safest path. And for a long time it had been, but time changes things. The rancher felt a deep pull in his chest, not toward fear, but toward duty. The land was asking for acknowledgement, not action. Yet, just recognition. It wanted someone to see it fully, without turning away. Tears filled his eyes, surprising him.
He was not sad, exactly.
He felt overwhelmed.
Carrying that much truth was heavier than he had imagined.
He finally understood why his grandfather's notes had been so brief near the end. Words were not enough. After a while, the shimmering faded. The air returned to normal. The land became just land again. The rancher looked away, slowly, carefully. His hands shook as he pushed himself to his feet. Everything inside him had changed. The walk back to the house felt longer than usual. The familiar paths now felt different, as if he were seeing them for the first time. He realized that once truth is seen, even ordinary things are never quite the same. Inside the house, he sat in silence. He did not turn on the lights. He did not eat. He simply sat and listened to his own breathing. His thoughts were steady, but heavy.
Late that night, there was a knock at the door.
The rancher froze for a moment before standing up. He opened the door to find Samuel standing there, his face serious but calm. "You looked," Samuel said. It was not a question. The rancher nodded. "I did." Samuel stepped inside and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. "Now you understand," Samuel said finally. "Yes," the rancher replied, "and I understand why no one wanted to talk about it." Samuel sighed. Knowing changes the shape of a life. "Why didn't you stop me?" the rancher asked. Samuel met his eyes. "Because it was time. And because only choice gives truth its meaning." They sat together at the table. The rancher poured water for both of them. His hands were steadier now. "What happens next?" the rancher asked. Samuel shook his head. "That depends on you. Seeing is only the beginning." After Samuel left, the rancher lay awake until morning. His mind replayed what he had felt over and over. Not images, but understanding. The land was not asking to be fixed. It was asking to be faced honestly. When morning came, the world looked brighter, sharper. The rancher stepped outside and felt the weight of the day ahead. He knew that nothing could return to how it was before. But strangely, he did not feel regret. He had looked, and now the responsibility was his. The rancher moved through the next few days like a man carrying a heavy load that no one else could see. From the outside, his life looked the same. He woke early, worked the land, and cared for the animals. But inside, everything had shifted. Every action now felt connected to a larger meaning. The land was no longer just soil and grass. He was memory. It was responsibility. This. He did not return to the edge right away, not because he was afraid, but because he understood that rushing would lead to mistakes. What he had seen was not something to react to quickly. It needed thought, patience, and honesty. Still, the feeling never left him. It stayed in his chest, quiet but firm, like a hand resting there, reminding him it was real. People began to notice the change in him. At the general store, neighbors looked at him a little longer than usual. Some nodded with understanding. Others avoided his eyes. News traveled fast in small towns. Even when no one spoke directly, they could sense that he knew something now, something they had chosen not to know. One afternoon, a neighbor named Thomas stopped him by the road. "You've been near that side of the land," Thomas said, not accusing, just stating a fact. The rancher nodded slowly. Breath.
Yes! Thomas took a deep breath. My father once stood where you stood.
He came back quieter, different. "Did he ever talk about it?" the rancher asked. Thomas shook his head. "No, but he carried it until the day he died." The words settled heavily between them. The rancher realized then what scared people most was not the land itself, but the weight of awareness. Knowing meant carrying something that could not be put down. That night, the rancher sat alone at his table and knowing became heavier than ever. He understood now why silence had been chosen so many times before. Silence was easier. Breath. Silence allowed life to continue without disruption. But silence also allowed truth to remain unfinished. He thought of his grandfather, of the brief notes, barrage, of the careful avoidance. They had done what they believed was best for their time. But times change. What once could be ignored now demanded attention. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, his dreams were calm but filled with meaning. Desk. He dreamed of fences not meant to divide but to guide. Of land not asking to be owned but respected. The next morning he made a decision. He began by reviewing everything he owned, everything he controlled. The land, the water rights, the agreements his family had made long ago. He spent hours reading old documents, tracing boundaries that were drawn by hands long gone. Some lines suddenly felt wrong, not illegal, but careless. He realized something important. The issue was not about giving something up. It was about correcting something that had been accepted for too long without question. When Samuel came by again, the rancher was ready.
"I think I know what I need to do," the rancher said. Samuel studied him carefully.
Knowing what to do and choosing to do it are different things. "I know," the rancher replied. "And I know it won't be easy." Samuel nodded. "It never is." Word spread quickly once the rancher began asking questions publicly. He contacted local officials. He requested meetings. He asked for reviews of old land decisions that had been considered settled for decades. Some people supported him quietly. Others openly criticized him. "You're stirring things up," one man said angrily at a town meeting. Some things are better left alone. The rancher stood calmly. Left alone for who? The room fell silent. Opposition grew stronger as days passed. Friends became distant. Invitations stopped coming. Breath. Even simple conversations felt strained. The rancher understood now another reason people stayed silent. Truth has a way of making comfort uncomfortable. There were nights when doubt crept in. Bird. Nights when he wondered if he should stop. If carrying this burden alone was worth the cost. The ranch was his life. Losing it would mean losing everything he had built. But every time doubt rose, he remembered the moment he looked. The clarity. The understanding. Turning back now would mean pretending he had never seen it. And that, he realized, would be the greatest loss of all. One evening, standing on his porch, he watched the sunset paint the land in warm colors. For the first time since everything began, he felt a sense of peace, not because things were resolved, but because he was being honest. The animals seemed calmer now. The silence felt lighter. Even the air seemed to move more freely. It was as if the land recognized the effort, even before any outcome was decided. The consequences came slowly. Then, all at once, legal challenges, financial pressure, people questioning his motives. Some accused him of seeking attention. Breath. Others claimed he was betraying his own history. Each accusation hurt, but none changed his resolve. Breath. He sold part of what he owned to cover costs. He simplified his life. He let go of comforts he once thought were necessary. Through it all, he felt strangely lighter. Losing things was easier than losing integrity. One afternoon, Thomas returned. "You're doing what my father couldn't," he said quietly. The rancher shook his head. "He did what he could in his time," Thomas nodded. "Maybe. But timing matters." As months passed, changes began to take shape. Not dramatic ones, not instant victories, but movement, recognition, a shift in understanding. The land's story, once buried under silence, was finally being spoken aloud. The rancher stood at the edge again one evening, not to look for answers, but to acknowledge the path he had chosen. The land was quiet, steady, present. Rask. He understood now that courage was not about bold actions. It was about steady ones. About choosing truth, even when it costs comfort. Whatever the final outcome would be, his life had already changed. And for the first time, he knew that change was not something to fear. Time moved forward, but it did not move easily. The rancher's life no longer followed the smooth path it once had. Every step now felt earned. Every quiet moment carried meaning. He had accepted that things would never return to how they were before, and surprisingly, that acceptance brought him strength. The process he had started continued slowly. Meetings led to reviews. Reviews led to changes. But they happened anyway. Some decisions were corrected. Some boundaries were adjusted. Some responsibilities were shared instead of hidden. It was not a dramatic ending, and it was not perfect, but it was honest. The ranch itself changed with him. He reduced its size, but not its care. With less land to manage, he paid closer attention to what remained. The soil felt healthier. The animals moved more freely. The quiet no longer felt heavy. It felt natural again. like it had when he was younger. People in town spoke about him differently now. Some still shook their heads, saying he had made life harder for himself for no clear reason. Others spoke with respect, even if they never said it to his face. Over time, the sharp criticism softened into thoughtful silence. One evening, Samuel visited for the last time. "You did what the land asked," Samuel said, sitting across from him on the porch. "I did what I could," the rancher replied. Samuel smiled gently. "That's all anyone can do." They watched the sunset together, the sky turning warm and calm. There was no warning this time. No tension, just light fading into night as it always had. "Do you regret looking?" Samuel asked quietly. The rancher thought carefully before answering.
"No," he said. "It cost me, but it also gave me clarity."
"I'd rather live with truth than comfort built on silence." Samuel nodded, satisfied. "Then the burden has done its work." After that night, Samuel did not return. The rancher later heard that the old man had moved on, satisfied that the land was no longer waiting for someone to see it. Passed. The rancher grew older, slower, but steadier for his. His hair turned gray. His hands showed the marks of long work. He kept fewer animals, but he knew each one well. He spent more time sitting, watching the land instead of shaping it. Sometimes visitors came, curious about the stories they had heard. They asked questions carefully, respectfully. "Is it true?" they would ask. "About the land?" The rancher never gave dramatic answers. Bration. He never described what he had seen. "It's true that looking changes you," he would say. "And once you change, the world around you changes too." Some visitors understood. Others left disappointed, hoping for something more exciting. The rancher did not mind. Truth was not meant to entertain. It was meant to guide. One quiet morning he walked to the edge again. But not because he was called, but because he wanted to say goodbye in his own way.
The land was calm.
It did not shimmer. It did not demand attention. He stood there for a long time, feeling grateful. Grateful that he had looked. Grateful that he had chosen action over avoidance. Grateful that he had lived honestly even when it was difficult. As he turned back toward the house, he realized something important. The moment that had changed everything was not the moment he looked. It was the moment he decided not to turn away afterward. That was the true turning point. When the rancher eventually passed, there were no grand speeches, no monuments. Breath.
Just quiet respect. The land remained steady and open, no longer carrying unfinished weight.
Rasp. And sometimes when people spoke about him, they said this: he was warned not to look. He looked anyway. And because of that, things were set right. His life became a reminder that courage does not always shout. Sometimes it simply stands still, looks honestly, and chooses truth, no matter the cost. And that choice, once made, can change everything.